Hey everybody, I'm Ryo Yamaguchi, the publicist at Copper Canyon Press, and you are watching season 3 of our interview series, Line Break, which goes off the page and into the homes and minds of our beloved poets. We began Line Break as a way to connect during the pandemic, and we've had so much fun seeing poets on screen, hearing poems, talking about writing, books, life, that we simply had to keep the series going. Thank you for tuning in. One of the best parts of this job is meeting new poets. And one of the best parts of meeting new poets is finding these deep commonalities. When Amanda Gunn and I first spoke, it took us a while to realize that we spent many of the same years in the same sleepy corner of central Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, where U of I resides. I don't think we ever interacted, and it was amazing to talk to this other poet who seemed to have lived in this alternate universe, each of us with our totally discrete lives set in this common place and time. That sense of personal life, the infinite interior of a personal life, otherwise adrift in the expanse of a shared world, that's one of the most incredible dynamics of Amanda Gunn's debut collection, Things I Didn't Do With This Body. I am so excited to talk about it today with Amanda, with all of you. Amanda, my goodness, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
So it's December, and I think anyone who's been watching kind of series knows I'm a little bit focused on the end of the year. So I can't resist talking about the end of the year. Here in Santa Fe, we are bracing for what's supposed to be a big snowstorm. I think it's already kind of passed over the Sierra, kind of out by you. So I kind of want to open up and asking you, Amanda, would you call yourself a winter soul or a summer soul, or maybe neither? What do you think?
That's so hard to say. I would say I'm something of a fall person, a fall soul, if that exists.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely. That seems poetic to me. What is it about fall? I mean, is it that kind of change? Is it the colors? Like, yeah.
I don't know. It's this sort of there's something really sort of poetic, I think, about fall. There's a sense of it being the end of something, right? The end of like the pleasures of summer, with also this sort of impending cold coming on, right? It's this sort of being wedged between these two really different kinds of grief or something that makes me feel like that resonates with my resonates with my poetic soul.
I totally get that. The impending grief or impending, yeah. I mean that I think of the interiority and all these things. Like, it's funny to me to think. I mean, I guess I kind of opened with this weird season thing too, thinking about you as someone who, right before this call, we were talking about how you're in Berkeley, but you're completing your PhD at Harvard, so you spend a lot of time in the Northeast. I mean, so you've experienced all these different seasons, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up really a child of four seasons. I grew up in Connecticut, um, and it's been very strange being out here and not really knowing what to expect. The winter is sort of like an onslaught of rain, but it's still kind of warm and sunny sometimes, and um, really adjusting myself to a place that where change feels more subtle. Right, in the
Yeah.
Northeast, there's this sense of really understanding where you are with regard to the seasons is very different here
Yeah.
in
Yeah, I know.
Berkeley.
I could think of that fourth season where you can really pinpoint like what date it is just by what's sort of happening with, yeah,
Right.
snow, rain and stuff. So we're talking about how, we've shared this time in central Illinois. And so kind of remind me again,
Yes.
sort of your trajectory of your childhood. So you were raised kind of in Connecticut, but I know that you
Mhm.
spent time as sort of a young adult there, or I mean, you had a lot of family there. I don't know. Could you remind me what, yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in Connecticut. I ended up going to college in New York City at Columbia for a little while, but it was not for me. It was not for me at all, and I ended up taking some time off, and then when I was ready to go back to school, um, I it sort of worked out for me to move to Illinois. And because my mother's entire family is from Champaign-Urbana, mostly Urbana. And her mother's house was there, my grandmother's house. And so I moved out there to take care of it. And eventually I went to the University of Illinois. So it's funny that when you say that, you know, we passed through those halls at the same time, but we didn't know each other. But I really felt like when I was there, I had a kind of towny life. Right. I spent most of my time with my family, and I lived on the north end of town, which was nary a student in sight, you know. Yeah, so that's sort of how I ended up there. And then afterwards, I returned to Connecticut, where I worked, as a medical copy editor for a dozen years before going back to grad school.
Yeah. I know, and your kind of life and experience with medical writing is something I really sort of want to talk about too, particularly all the themes that are happening in this poetry collection. I'm going to linger on this Urbana thing for just a second longer though, because
please do.
You know, I mean, as someone who's been there, and many people have, I mean, you know, there's a unique dynamic to the place that some college towns have, but not all of them. I mean, I'm thinking of places like Lawrence, Kansas, maybe is another place that's kind of like this, where you have what would otherwise be a fairly rural mid-sized city, right. and those kinds of places have just really undergone a lot of change over the last several decades, just politically, socially, economically. But then you have this like major university that's there that brings the entire city or the entire world in. Was that like, and you're talking, I mean, so exactly the way you described like towny life versus like the university life, and that of course is in stark contrast, I'm sure, to living in Connecticut, definitely living in New York. Was that a difference you like? Like, did you prefer Urbana, or like, or what, or was there a culture shock for you when you first got there? Or, yeah.
No, there actually wasn't a culture shock, because I had spent many summers going up there to spend with my grandmother in that house that I eventually lived in.
I mean, amazing,
and so it was such a there was very much a feeling of coming home, and you know, this is just sort of on a personal level. It was very much a feeling of coming home and getting to know my mother's family as an adult in a way that was really in a way that was just really special to me.
Yeah.
And I write about some of them in my work. But I think it definitely was a change from a place like Columbia, in terms of just the size of it. Like when I remember getting to the University of Illinois, and it's this massive university. I think at the time we were there were 36,000 students.
That sounds right to me. Yeah, because I remember that was the population of the entire suburban town that I came from, but in Bartlett. But anyway, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, that number is very seared to my mind because I remember them being the same. So yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So you know, coming to this place that had like what do they call it? What you do before the football game? Tailgating, like
right.
Like the whole tailgate, like it was like they're just culturally, it was so radically different from being at a place like Columbia. And so I think that was the culture shock. That within the university was the culture shock, but not the town itself, not living there. In the town, I felt very comfortable and very at home.
Yeah. It's funny thinking of how like I'd always thought of that with my grandparents. My grandparents lived in a sort of a near suburb of Louisville, Kentucky, and that was an odd anchorage, like, because I'd been there my entire life, you know, but my family moved around a lot. So in some ways that was more home than any of my actual homes with my family, because it just had a longer duration, you know. Or something like that. That's so interesting. Well, you're kind of starting to touch on this terrain that is sort of one of the only question that I really like to ask in every one of these line breaks. So an old question my predecessor, Laura Buccieri, had, and I love this question so much. So I'm just going to kind of ask you this question. And it's in this whole realm of like your origins, you know? So thinking about your time in Connecticut, or thinking your time as a young adult going to college at U of I, or even earlier than that. I mean, if you can recall like the first time you felt yourself starting to become a creative person, or the first time that you really recognized yourself in other art, in books or in movies, or whatever was first attracting you, and the first time you kind of saw yourself reflected in that. Yeah.
Oh, as a creative person, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that I sort of see it and see the question in two ways. I think that I remember being 7 years old and knowing that I wanted to be a writer.
That's so incredible. Oh, like with conviction, like you were like, this is what I'm
With
going to do.
conviction.
Yeah, amazing. That's so amazing. Yeah.
I
What do you think it
remember
was?
that,
Like, did you felt that you need to express yourself, or that you want to capture, describe things around, or yeah, what do you think it was like?
it's really funny. I think that just already I loved reading when I was really little. And I had that feeling of like, put me in, coach. Like that's how, that's how I
That's amazing.
felt when I would read something that I really loved. I got, just let me
That,
get in there.
I just want you to know that feels like a very Illinois reference, by the way.
I know it
That's
does.
yeah. So, anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
It does. It does. So wanting to be a writer happened very young. I didn't necessarily see a path to being a poet full time until many years later, actually not that long ago, in the middle of my MFA. Even when I was doing the MFA, I thought I'll do this and then I'll go back to being a copy editor. I'll just go back to work in that way. But yeah, but I also, in terms of like seeing myself, I don't know, seeing myself as a creative person in other works. Yeah, I think it has to come down again to my reading. And right when I was a kid, I read, uh, as I was growing up, I read every plucky girl series that was ever written, starting with Ramona and ending with, Anne of Green Gables and Laura Ingalls Wilder in the middle. And like I just these were the things that I sort of loved and I wanted to be like these women who wrote these books. I was conscious of the writers, you know.
Yeah. I think I mean, it's funny how thinking of that world of the plucky women, us like protagonists or something, but that's been so important for like our development as a society. The specific books that you're referencing, for empowerment of women, and of course, and things like that, but then also to inspire that craft of writing, or that craft of like attention, and critique, social critique, and things too.
Yeah.
I think that's so wonderful. I love what you say here, this thing you kind of just inserted, which is this thing of like, I'm just going to do poetry, I'm going to do my MFA, and then I'm going to go back to work. And this is something you're really delineating something that I've really tried to work through. I can think of one time I did an interview with someone, and we kind of got into the same sort of territory, where it was like, poetry is not and can never be work, even though you are making a career out of it, like, and that's a wonderful dynamic. I mean, I think, to always to think of that way. I don't know, do you think of poetry as work? I mean, of course poetry means also like teaching and reading and everything. Yeah, but
Yes, it does mean all those things. I think of it as, well, it's really hard to say. I kind of go back and forth on this issue. I think I'm like you. I'm always like, is it work? Is it my work? Is it this thing that, and I don't know, is it my work with a capital W or a lowercase w? You know, like
Yeah.
what is it? And what do those two things mean? I think that I think of poetry, you know, like you said, reading friends' work,
Yeah.
editing, writing my own, teaching, you know, all of these things as poetry. But do I speak of them with the same, you know, do I speak of all of these things, this collection of things, with the same sort of actual feeling in my heart? And I mean that, that I did when I spoke of my work when I was a copy editor, which
Yeah.
was important to me, which led me to this place,
Yeah.
which informs my writing, but nonetheless didn't feed me in the same way.
Yeah. Mm, right.
Right. So that that felt like, I don't know, maybe the difference is maybe it's like work and maybe there's a job, you know. I don't know. I feel like there's some special language to be deployed, right, for each of these things, that really gets at the nuance of
Yeah.
how different they are from each other,
To-
how different they feel, right? Because I think we're talking about how we feel about it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When we needed a better word. It's funny. I was reading something this weekend that was from German translation, and he said it was Kant, Immanuel Kant, and he says we have a word for this, but then in the translation it's like 5 words because that's how German works, you know. Like,
Right,
and I
right.
love that. I was so tickled by that. I was like, no, we don't have a word for it, you know.
Right.
Anyway, whatever. Yeah. This is, I think, a great time to hear a poem. Then, I mean, let's hear the
Oh
work.
yeah.
What do you think? I mean, is it? Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
the
yeah,
work.
yeah.
The work. Okay, I'm gonna do something a little bit cute. I'm gonna read the first poem and the last poem, but I'll start with the first
That sounds
poem of
great.
the book.
Excellent.
Um, the first poem is a poem that I wrote about my dad, and this one is an American sonnet. So a few sonnets in the book. Father at table. There was what he demanded with one word and a pointing finger. Chicken, cornbread, potatoes. The delicacies his labor both purchased and prepared for us. All his long hours. Trying not to interrupt the table talk that had snapped shut and refused him. Not vain, not white folk. He asked only one courtesy. No swearing he could hear. He was a Christian and my father. That God-forsaken finger. How stingy it seemed then. Now, how tender, how pleading. How I bristled at the soft of his voice. An engine rumbling under the hood of our attention. And oh, what kindness I held back, expecting things he would never ask of me. Wait your turn. Say thank you. Say please.
That was a wonderful read. There's so much poise in your reading. I mean,
Thank you.
I can hear the sonnet, you know, but it's not just like hearing the sonnet. It's like hearing the sonnet, like doing this, you know, the eye tracking and the sonnet as painting in the father, you know, and that kind of that careful attention, that careful line making. Yeah, I don't know. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I want to talk about, yeah, so I really want to talk about form in this book. And But maybe let's talk about sonnets because okay, so Toby, whom you just met, has this great question about sonnets, and it's kind of ranging and freewheeling a little bit. And so I'm just gonna let me just ask you this question verbatim, and this is from Toby.
Okay.
Let me get to it here. So Toby says, I love sonnets, and I loved sonnets in Things I Didn't Do with This Body, which expand upon the rich catalog of African American experimental sonnets. How did you first enter this form? Like, I think, what was your first entree into this form? And what has been generative for you about its limits and its history or any of its features? How do you approach the decision between writing a more formal, like rhyming sonnet, or a sonnet that appears more experimental or modern?
Yeah. Okay.
Couple points to that question there.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so many. That's, you might have to remind me of like other aspects as I guess
I
as
sure
I
can.
try to
I
answer.
will.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
So I did my my MFA training at Johns Hopkins, and there was a lot of. I mean, you can write any way you want there. It was a wonderful program, but I did get an education in meter and form there that I had not had uh, before. And you know, I wrote free verse most of the time, but my final semester in the MFA, I decided I wanted to write entirely in sonnets because I wrote sonnets for every assignment because I wanted to master that sense of economy. I heard this poem by Rena Espelot called "Find Work," and in it she talks about her grandmother, and she tells a certain narrative of her grandmother's whole life in this sonnet. And I got that feeling again. Put me in, coach. I got that
Yeah.
same feeling.
I
I
love
got
this.
that same feeling.
I not only I can do that, I have to do that. I have to do what
I
I've just
have to
seen
do
or
it.
something. So, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That particular poem, of course, I've read many sonnets over the years, but that particular poem was the one that made me say, I have to learn how to do this. And as a result, I wrote two poems about my grandmother and my grandfather, um, Long Ways from Home and Monarch, about my grandma Jessie, whose house I lived in. Um, and and then I just sort of wrote love sonnets and grief sonnets um, and I just sort of that particular time I was really writing formal rhyming sonnets, and for me, a lot of the like beauty and charm of the form was to be found in the rhymes, because up until then, you know, if you read my book, you see that there's a lot of poems that have internal rhyme. That's something I got to much later. Up until this point, I had not been really using rhyme. Um, and so the excitement I felt around it was about getting to use these loud, perfect rhymes just unabashedly. Like, eh, eh, that was something that I found really beautiful in the form. The way that um, this is why I was particularly drawn to the Shakespearean sonnet, because there's this feeling of that final rhyming couplet snapping shut, um, and the authority in that kind of sound making that sound making produces was really fun and really exciting
Yeah.
to get to use. Um, And then there have been other times, there are times when rhyme doesn't feel that kind of snapping shut. That kind of rhyme doesn't necessarily feel like what I need to be doing in that poem.
Yeah.
But I still love the kind of the economy and the turn and the pacing that 14 lines will get you, which is why I didn't try to write this sonnet, Father at Table. I didn't try to write it as a formal sonnet. I wrote it in the American style.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to kind of go back to my mind is like latching on to this word that you used, which was loud, and the loudness of rhyme, and maybe the brazenness, and I've been thinking about that in a way, also finding myself drawn to a lot of like what I would say severely formal poetry, like in a way. And what you say is like
Severely formal. Sorry, that's really good.
I mean, well, like, because sometimes I feel, particularly as a modern poet, or a poet of the contemporary age, like I feel like there can be a flirtation with form. There can be, but I've been seeing in other poets, and some whom we'll talk about in this line break series, really embracing like, wow, just like super like bang on, rhyme, like, and there's something that is really remarkable and wonderful about that. And to me, I hadn't thought about it until you said that word loud. I was like, oh, it's because it's loud. And there's something about loudness that like, it's like what's great about going to a really like loud concert. I just had the great fortune over the Thanksgiving holiday of camping on the beach many nights, and just like falling asleep to not only, you think of like the ocean as like this lulling presence, but it'd be like, this was crashing loud waves like all night long, and you lose yourself in that, or you struggle to maintain your integrity within it. It's spectacle, and spectacle is so often used in these nefarious, horrible ways, but to like take ownership of spectacle, like in something like poetry, is like a delight. I don't know, I'm trying to find a question in this. I'm just kind of remarking on your sense of that, but
yeah. I mean, I guess I feel the same way about poems that I do about musicals. Like, go big or
okay, tell me more.
like,
Yeah.
like go big or go home. That's how I feel like that. I just feel if the thing that rhyme can help produce, is like this emotional resonance that feels really, it's like it kind of hits you in the pit of your stomach, right? And if you're using rhyme and really deploying it to its utmost, then I think you're taking emotional risk. It's not just a formal risk, it's an emotional risk. And that is something that I think is really exciting. I mean, why not do something that only poetry can do?
You're bringing up the idea of form and emotion, is bringing me to some other terrain that I was kind of hoping we get into, and that is sort of trying to think of the best angle into this. Like, it's sort of this idea that something I noticed also in this work. Okay, so first of all, the work is like really formally diverse, and so we're talking about sonnets here, and these and the severe form of rhyme and things, but that is like just one part of this entire body of work. And so, okay, let me ask this question. So this is kind of a more basic question. So a lot of the sonnets are sort of front loaded, like to the beginning of the work, and so there's kind of this like arc to the formal change that happens in the book, and I know that some of this was sort of decided upon in developmental editing, and things. But I was curious if you could kind of talk a little bit about how this book is assembled, like maybe formally, but maybe also emotionally. Yeah.
Formally, yeah. Do you mean how it's ordered, or how it's
Yeah.
or how it's curated, like, which I feel like is maybe slightly different in like what's included or what's how it's ordered.
I think
How it's ordered is more mysterious to me. That
yes. Okay. Yeah.
because I got so much help on ordering the book. I find
Yeah.
like a lot of, but this is the problem that a lot of poets have, I think. It's very hard to order your own work. I think when you
Yeah.
do it yourself, you end up sort of lumping things thematically. Like, okay, these are going to be my girlfriend poems, and these are going to be my, and they just sort of my historical poems. It still does that to some degree, but so because I sort of put myself in the hands of other, really smart people, I'm not sure I really have an angle on the ordering principle of the book. But I will say that I wanted the poem. I wanted the book to sort of organize itself around working its way into what I felt was the most important poem in the book, and then working its way out of it.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's a poem.
Can you, or do you want to identify that poem, or should
I
we? Or should we
don't.
let
I
it?
think
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
gonna.
Let's not. Let's not
I'm
do
not
it.
gonna
Yeah.
say. I was
Yeah.
gonna
Okay. Great.
say,
Great.
but
Great.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I shouldn't say.
Don't say it.
So
Don't say it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it. So, but and yeah, I just sort of wanted sort of in the end, I did, because I kept adding in more material. I was sort of
Yeah.
doing my best, to keep it from being totally thematically organized,
Yeah.
and really to have the poems, have an energy off of each other as they
Yeah.
moved through.
Can we talk about the curation part of it then? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So talk about what were the poems that you wanted to have together in the space of the book? Like, or yeah, we're talking about curation, or what didn't make it, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple of I mean, it's funny. It's like, I think a lot of first books have so much from across, the life of the poet, right? Because like there's I think most people, not this isn't true of everybody, but I think most people, when they're putting together their first book, they don't know they're writing a book until somebody says you're writing a book. Like you don't know, you're just taking it poem by poem, week by week, or at least that's how it was for me.
Yeah. I think
Until
you're describing one of the main common things of a debut book, which is all of yourself into it, and that,
yeah. And so it ends up, so then what I end up having is this book that is about family, about history, about grief, about pleasure, about food. There's a lot of food, like surprisingly a lot of food in this book.
It's still it's a delicious book. Yeah. Yeah.
And also about illness, about chronic illness. Like there's a lot, there's so many things. But what it begins to sort of coalesce around is this notion of how the body carries you through your life, and the ways in which it can support that life, limit that life, and the ways that we in turn act on the body that transform it in ways that are sometimes irrevocable,
Yeah.
And I feel like the book ends up living in that place of thinking about what's irrevocable,
Mhm. Yeah.
Even though it's about, for me it's about, all these other sort of subcategories and things, but
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. I mean, you earlier when you're sort of dropping kind of descriptor words of what's contained in the book. I mean, every one of those is somewhere in my question set here, which is great. So I'm happy, I'm feeling aligned. But let's the way you put this, like, oh man, I'm like, the what's irrevocable and that we've done, or that just happens to the body, and that
That's right.
and that I mean, I think, oh my, I mean, my wife and I this morning had one of those like Monday breakfast things where we're like, oh, I'm getting so like my gray hair in my beard and like all these, just like one of those
Yeah.
not good ways to start Monday. But let me but thinking about, okay, all of this, of course, there's your history as a medical copy editor. So can we talk about that
Oh
for a
yeah.
second, and how
Sure.
you think that informs this sense, or this theoretical structure, or thematic structure of the book? Like do you feel that is this book writing yourself out of all of your experiences reading so much medical literature, or is it,
Well,
how do you
I
really?
don't know. It's really hard to say, because like when I was working, I mean, I had several different lives as a medical copy editor. The last part of that was working. I was working for Big Pharma, in this small medical education company, um, and I worked on one drug for 8 years.
It doesn't get much more specialist than that, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah, yeah, and so this particular drug, there was that issue. I mean, it's possible that was the sort of germ of the idea of thinking about the body sustaining damage, right, through illness. um and sometimes it can be recovered, and sometimes it can't. And that, in addition to my own aging and my own experiences, and all of that, and the experiences of the people I love. But I mean, there was a lot of difficult material to look through for commas and periods, and all of the sort of, we were there to make sure everything was clean and perfect and ready to submit to the FDA. But along the way, you see things that are difficult to encounter, you know. I'd say that specifically comes into play and I think there's a couple of poems in the book that reference my time there. But that broader question of, the things you see in that work, I think comes into the issue of chronicity and
Could you
and
unpack that word chronicity? Yeah.
oh, just the state of being chronic,
Yeah.
the chronic illness that
Yeah.
is with you, that will
Okay,
never
gotcha.
ever go away.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about a mental illness in the book. There's a series that I think of as the chronic series. It's not labeled that in the book, but it's what I think of the title of the series being. Because it's all about reckoning with pain that's not going to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
Do you know? And I like it's
Yeah.
yeah. So and this is the series was based on my experience. And this is something that I've been experiencing since I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
But that I didn't start to reckon with until I was a very grown adult.
Yeah.
You know, and really understanding what it means to have something that will only get worse, that will not get better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean,
Um,
and that's, yeah, I mean, that's massive. That's so massive. Like, yeah. Let me ask you, okay, let me ask you a question. I'm so thinking of pain and of this thing that just really is not going to get better. But there is in this book, there is a counter to it, and that is just lavish pleasure. All these pleasures that are in here, sexual pleasure, talking about food and food in all of these sensory ways. And so let me ask a question, but it's going to be a really specific question, but I'm going to condition it with a general question. So let's try this format. So the
okay.
general question to condition the specific question is, what is the role of pleasure in this book? What is the role of pleasure for you? Is it a counterbalance to pain? Is it an escape from pain? Is it a form of protest? So those things. Okay. Specific question within those conditioning questions. Can we talk about perfume? I really want to talk about
Oh,
perfume. Yeah.
anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime.
I think of you as a scent poet, and I think that gives you, and I think it's a hard won thing. There aren't many scent poets out there. And I think this gives you
That's
access
amazing.
to special powers. You have like these crazy special powers because of this. So like, can you tell me about your special power? Yeah.
My special power. I have always been obsessed with scent, and I've been a serious collector of perfume um, since I was a teenager.
Yeah. I mean, I have to mention, since you mentioned to me earlier that you recorded something recently in your perfume closet,
In my
or you
perfume
had
closet.
before. Yeah.
Yeah, that was in my last the last house I lived in, and I can't tell you where I kept my clothes, but I had a perfume closet. I have no idea. They were wherever. Um, but yeah, I've had this obsession with scent, and it's very interesting. Um, I think people who sort of perfume culture, um, people who are, sort of, I don't know, there's all sorts of names, perfumistas, frag heads, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I think um, I think people who are obsessed with perfume are obsessed with memory, right? Because we're always chasing a memory. We're always trying to, if I smell a perfume that smells like, you know, my dad's charcoal grill when I was a kid, I would pay any amount of money for that perfume. It's this trying to bring back. Um, and it's not always smells that are pretty.
Yeah.
Sometimes especially the animalic uh scents that are
Yeah.
that are that are that are inside what smell like really beautiful perfumes. Something might smell really fecal, or it
Yeah.
might have a sort of, it might smell like wet wood
Yeah.
or something like that. Um, but it doesn't matter because they evoke something
Yeah.
um, that that you want to collect and keep and reproduce
Yeah.
again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
Um,
I love the sense you're describing, where it's like it's as though this loved one or this lost person or lost experience is just upwind of you. Like I can, like, that's my, I can't see them, but I know they're there. Their presence is there. Like that.
that's right.
Um,
That's right. When I smell my grandmother's perfume, I feel like I'm back in her bedroom.
yeah.
It's this being snapped back. That's just sort of, that's just very, it's very enticing. Um, but you asked about the role of pleasure.
Yeah.
That's a, I write about it a lot, and I'm still figuring out what I mean by it. I think that when I write about pleasure, it's often about refusal,
Mm,
right?
yeah,
It's often about refusal of some kind. But then there's also the problem
so,
of the body, right? That I'm always thinking about, and where where certain kinds of pleasure can also be a punishment to the body, can
yeah,
also change the body,
right.
can also hurt the body. And then the body in turn limits the life,
Mm,
right? Thinking
yeah,
about things like, well, I don't know if you would consider it pleasure, but thinking about things like um, addiction, or, just
yeah.
things that
I mean, addiction begins in pleasure, does it not? I mean,
I think it
one thinks
does.
that, yeah,
Yeah, I think it does, but then it becomes something else.
yeah, yeah,
It's something I think about. It's something I think about because it's affected my life,
yeah.
um, but not something I'm expert in. So
No, sure, yeah.
not sure. Um, yeah,
These are really it's really powerful dynamics, and I think your book has really made me think about pleasure in different ways too, and my own senses. I mean, I don't want to co-opt a term like addiction or something, but I certainly I overindulge in all kinds of things, like, and it has had me thinking about that relationship of it, and part of it is just that question of like, what am I seeking in the experiences that I'm giving to myself, or in things I'm consuming, or like, what am I really after in that,
yeah,
and the answer has never been clear to me. Like,
yeah. It's
yeah,
very interesting, isn't it?
yeah,
It's very interesting because, excuse me, because um, I know that, you know, taking the night off and like watching a movie, and, or like um, watching a show that I really want to watch and then binging on it. At first, it's a pleasure, and then it turns into this thing that loses
mm,
its its power to sort of be pleasurable or to give pleasure
yeah,
uh, over time. And like, why does that happen? Where is the drop off? Like, where's the that's
yeah,
what you always want to know, is when is this giving me something, and when does it start to take something?
yeah,
When does it have that tipping point where it's begun to take something away?
yeah. Well, I'm gonna make a risky comment here, and that is that poetry ceaselessly gives pleasure, and that's maybe my very gauche, awkward way of recognizing that we could talk forever, and like, we're coming to the top of the hour, got to come to wrap. I mean, I would love to hear one more poem. You talked about reading
Yes.
the last one, yeah, and if you don't mind, I hope that wasn't too abrupt, but yeah.
No, no, not at all, not at all. Okay. Like I said, I'm going to read the last poem in the book, which I'll just preface by saying that that this is a poem I was thinking about, where I wrote when I was thinking about all the little decisions that go into whether you're going to become a mother or not, and how they sort of turn into a big decision like this. Erica says, melodies, prayers, babies. A woman who isn't asked says nothing. A woman who isn't a mother fields questions. A woman who isn't a mother owns a field. My mother holds my knee. My mother's left hand is a wooden shield. My mother tells her cousin when she's ready. A woman who waits. Erica says we give birth to different things. A woman who knows the difference says poems. A mother slices a pepper like a heart. A mother says, like this. My mother holds a braid, holds the milk, holds a chrysalis. One mother says, you dodged a bullet. A woman who waits for a sound in her heart. A doctor says, what saves you? What saves my life will burst a baby's heart. A doctor says, choose. My mother's hand in the car hits my heart. A mother's grief arrives already swaddled. A mother with ashes for children says, ishtanem. The woman who birthed my mother says, maybe. A woman who's no longer asked says, nothing. Erica says, birth things. A woman who makes a choice works a field. My mother taught my hands to crimp the pastry. I taught my mother's hands to lattice pastry. The woman who birthed my mother says prayers. My mother holds a needle, holds a feather, holds a door. When a doctor says choose, a death is meted. A poem says the same each time you meet it. A woman who doesn't choose crosses a field.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I love this poem so much. I feel so familiar to me, and I'm still caught off guard, like hearing it. And again, your reading is so the way you read is with such poise, and I can feel this lineage that the heritage is being passed through these really tactile experiences. I mean, this is a mother poem of all mother poems, I think. Like, I don't know, it's really wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And it gives me hope for future too, you know, and the mother is the junction between past and future, and all these, just incredible. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. I mean, we really could. I mean, we need like 3 more hours to I mean, there's so many things that I couldn't get to that I, really wanted to talk about. But we'll just have to save it perhaps for another time to do this. I'm so glad for what we could discuss today. Thank you so much for being here. I hope it was fun. I hope
it was great. Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had such a good time, and yeah, we're getting close here, December. So everyone, but hunker down in the winter time. Thank you all out there for joining us for this one, and we'll see you at the next line break.